Good Chodesh, Chodesh Tov. Thank you to all of our regulars for coming. Thank you to my Chavusa, Dr. Schumann, for coming. Thank you to my dad who's in person. And my mom is on Zoom. Grandma and Aunt Annie on Zoom as well. So tonight, the topic is Torah perspectives on eating. The last time we talked about this topic, we talked about the importance of eating kosher food, and now we'll talk about, within eating kosher, the approach and manner with which we eat our food. There's really going to be two parts of this shiur. The first part is about not doing too much physicality, and the second part is about making sure to give the body what it needs. So for those, if anyone has to leave in the next about 20-25 minutes, I would actually suggest they leave now, because if you just hear the first part without the second part, it'll be detrimental. But if you're able to stay till at least a half hour, then we'll get a full overview of the topics.
Excuse me, is this being recorded? Anybody has to leave and then get the second time?
Yes, my dad has been making a recording. Okay. So, a big question that we may have had in last week's Parshas Toldos, is when Yitzchak Avinu, Isaac, was about to give the blessings to Esav, he insisted on having a nice meal. So a big question we could address is, why did Yitzchak request a nice meal before he gave the blessings to Esav? What shaykhs, what connection is there between having a nice meal and giving the blessings? So B'ez Hashem will give three answers to this question, as well as to shed some light from perspectives from Gedolim and Rebbeim about Torah perspective on eating over this session. And they are being careful about what we eat and the way we eat, may it be as a chos and merit for ourselves, our family, our communities, and for all the Yidden, especially in Eretz Yisrael. So, Torah and Gashmias, physical desires and needs, they're really two sides of the same coin. One is about not overindulging in physicality, and two is providing the body what it needs so that it will partner with the neshama, with the soul, to carry out the Ratzon Hashem, to carry out the will of Hashem. Now, we'll first address the topic of precious. Precious comes from the word porish, which means to separate, and this means not being over-involved in the world. And we're talking about weekdays, not Shabbos. Shabbos is a mitzvah of ordinary Shabbos to enjoy one's food, but during the weekdays, that's what we're talking about. So the Rebbeinu B'chaye, he says that abstaining from non-kosher foods is in order to curtail our physical desires. That's why we don't eat non-kosher, as a way to curtail our physical desires. But Rashi says at the beginning of Parshas Kedoshim that avoiding eating non-kosher brings one to holiness. That when we find together, when we find the separation from eating non-kosher, that leads to holiness. The Ramban goes a step further. He says, Kaddish asmacha b'mutalach. I'd like to welcome Harvey, who just joined us. So the Ramban is saying, Kaddish asmacha b'mutalach, sanctifying ourselves in that which is permitted, meaning even amongst that which is permitted, kosher food, the Ramban is urging us from Kedoshim Tiyu that we should curtail ourselves from going to the nth degree of what is permitted. The Ramban says, by partaking of this world to a moderate degree, a person prevents himself from being a Nav Moshe Torah, a fallen person within the parameters of the Torah. So if he partakes in the world to a moderate degree, then he'll make sure to keep himself in good stead. So the Mishnah in Avos, Parak Vav, Mishnah Dalet, is a big yesod in precious. So this is you may have heard this Mishnah, but many people could think to interpret this Mishnah literally, but the Rebbeim of recent generations have said this Mishnah is actually meant as a general guidance as opposed to specific instructions. The Mishnah says, Kachki Darshal Torah. This is the path of the Torah. Pas melach tochal, bread with salt should you eat, umayim b'mesura tishta, and water, a measured amount of water should you drink, v'ala arch tishon, and you should sleep on the earth, v'chai tartichya, and live a life of distress, uvar Torah ata amo, and engross yourself in the Torah. Irmatra osa keen, if you do this, asracha b'tov lach. If you do this, you're praiseworthy and it'll be good for you. Asracha b'olam hazeh v'tov lach b'olam haba. You're praiseworthy in this world and it'll be good for you in the next world. So Rabbi Katzin Marashiva, or Moshe Katzin from the 5 towns, he says the Mishnah is not actually encouraging the practices that are outlined in the Mishnah. Rather, the Mishnah is giving over general guidance that our Ikar Geshmak, the main enjoyment that we derive, should not come from physicality like food and drink or a comfortable couch, but rather from a melus b'Torah, from deep involvement in Torah study. That should bring us out our main delight and enjoyment. My Rabbi from Yeshiva Gedola, Rabbi Meir Kadowitz, he opened the Summer's Man Tafshin Pei Dalid last summer by quoting to his shir from the Tosfos in Ksubis Daf Kuf Dalim and Aleph, different mass below. Tosfos says that before a person davens that the Torah should be ingrained inside of him, he needs to daven that unnecessary sweets not be ingrained inside of him. Because Rabbi Kaddish was saying that in order for the Torah to affect a person, he needs to be distanced to some degree from physicality of this world. If a person is too involved in physicality of this world, the Torah is not going to be absorbed by him, even if he tries. The Mishnah Avos Parak Dalin Mishnah Chav Ches says another big yesod in Precious. He says, Taiva Motzian es ha'adam min ha'olam. The Mishnah says that if a person overindulges in his desires, physical desires, that will draw a person out of the world. And the Asram Kalam says this means the Olam HaTorah, the world of the Torah. If a person is too involved in this world, he's going to be drawn out of the world of the Torah. The Be'er Lacha in Simon Tafkuf and Dalid, Hilchos Tisha B'Av, starts talking about Chol HaMoed. He says, on Chol HaMoed, which everyone knows is my favorite time of year, on Chol HaMoed, a person is to eat, drink, rejoice, and study Torah. However, some people eat, drink, and debase themselves. My Chavusa, Rabbi Eli Davis, who now lives in Lakewood, says that if a person eats in a refined, Torahic manner, a manner that's matzim, that's fitting with the spirit of the Torah, then that will lead him to learning Torah. But if a person, certainly if he eats and drinks non-kosher, or if he eats and drinks in a wild manner, that will lead to debasing himself, which is not an appropriate observance of Chol HaMoed. Rabbi Katzin quoted from a Rashi in Parts Kisetzei, in which Rashi says that if a person eats foods, even if they're kosher, but exclusively because they're popular in the general culture, then even if they're kosher, this Rashi warns us this could lead us to forget about Hashem and even to intermarry. Last week in the Parsha, we learned about Esav, Jerusha, we learned about Eliezer, Eved, Avram. The Medrash Tanchuma contrasts the statements of these two characters. Eliezer says to Rivka, Hagni'ini nama atmayim. Please let me sip a little bit of water. And Esav says haliteni, which Rashi says like a huge amount, like the way an animal eats. It's true, both Eliezer and Esav were hungry and thirsty and hungry respectively. But Eliezer phrased it in a way of saying like, please let me sip a little bit of water. Whereas Esav said haliteni, pouring this like huge amount of lentils into my throat, like the way an animal did. That just shows the way that Eliezer Eved Avram, a person who we should try to emulate, Rabbi Katzin says, the way he talks, the refined manner that he approaches food and drink, versus the grub, the physical manner that Esav approaches when he says halitain. I'd like to share some perspectives about how Gedolim ate. In Parshas B'chukosai, Parach Chaf Vav, Pasuk Hey, when the Torah is giving us various brachos, if we keep the Torah, one of them is V'achaltem lachmechem l'soba, and you shall eat your bread forced to satiation. Rashi says this means ochel kimim v'nisparich b'meah, that what's going to happen is in the times when we're keeping the Torah is we'll just eat like a little bit, like a few lentils, a few bites of pizza, a little bit of fruit, and the blessing is going to spread around in our stomachs, and we're going to be satisfied. We're not going to need to eat a whole meal of 3 hot dogs or 2 pieces of pizza. We'll just eat a few bites, and we'll be satisfied. That's the blessing. Rav Moshe Feinstein points out that in 2024 in America, most people would not want this bracha. Imagine going to a restaurant and eating only a few bites and then one is full. Most people would not want this bracha, Moshe Feinstein says. But yet the Torah feels this is an ideal, to just have to eat a little bit of food and then be satisfied. This comes on to the approach of eat to live rather than live to eat. A person who's lived to eat will want to have a big meal. A person who's eat to live will be satisfied if he only has a little bit, and that satisfies him. And Moshe Feinstein says that if we spend less time in the food process, less time eating, then we have more time to learn Torah. A Binyamin Force in the kosher kitchen brings a pasuk of Mishlei, Parak Yigil pasuk Chafhei, Tzadik ochel l'sova nafsho, that tzaddik eats, a righteous person eats for the satiation of his soul. Rav Hirsch says, Rav Shamshon for Hirsch, he says that eating should be a gathering of strength for Hashem's service. Not like the marketers tell us today, which is that eating should be to obey our taste buds. Here are a few stories about Gedolim's relationship with food, just to give us some aspirations, not for us to implement on a practical basis, but just for us to have some perspective about the way that the greatest Jews of the generation have viewed their interactions with food. The first Mesa, I spoke with Rav Chaim Miller, Rav Miller's son, about a few of these points. So we both thought this story was with Rav Yashiv, a well-known story. So Rav Yashiv was under doctor's orders to eat, but he would forget whether he had eaten. Because Rav Yashiv, to him, eating was like not a very noteworthy activity. He didn't really take note of it as being an essential part of his day. Like for a person who has normal functions, maybe they may not notice necessarily how many times they went to the bathroom or what time. So for Rav Yashiv, eating just like didn't register as an especially important activity. Therefore he forgot whether he ate. Rav Chaim Miller told me that the Chassam Sofer had a similar dilemma because he would also forget whether he ate. But since the Chassam Sofer would remember when he made a shahakal over the cheese, then he would remember that he ate. That would trigger him. He wouldn't remember actually eating the food, but he would remember the bracha that he made before eating the food. That would prove to him that he ate. According to Chassam Sofer, making a bracha, that really was a noteworthy activity, where he would really remember the eating based on the bracha. Rav Hershel Yaffe, my Chavusa Musa Seder, he told me that Maisa with Rav Chaim Kanievsky, the Gadol Hador of the present century, who was just nifter in Eretz Yisrael, he says that when Rav Chaim had food in front of him, he knew which bracha Rishonim to make. He knew to make a ha'etz on the apple. But after he ate the food, he was unsure which after bracha to make because the food was no longer in front of him. For example, after having eaten the apple, he forgot what food he ate. So he didn't know what bracha achrona, what after bracha to make. And the last story is a story that was attributed to Rabbi Aaron of Karlin, who was from Lithuania, who wrote the Sefer Beis Aaron, who wrote this song Ka'echsov, which we sing at Shalosh Shadas. He lived in the 1700s. So this information was from one of my band from Munster B'Dil Feig, and Rav Chaim Miller told me over from Shimshon of Pincus that there are those in our generation, at least as in the 1900s, who have this approach. Rabbi Feig clarified to me the story is as follows. It's a very well-known story. The Chassid comes to the Beis Aaron. The Chassid says as follows: you, the Rebbe, and me, the Chassid, are pretty much the same, because we both make brachas and eat apples. The Beis Aaron responds to the Chassid, the differences between us as follows: that you, the Chassid, want to eat the apple, and in order to eat the apple, you have to make a bracha, so you make the bracha. Me, I want to make the bracha, and therefore I have to eat an apple. So I eat the apple, but only because I want to make the bracha. The ikar is making the bracha. Rabbi Kastin told me that for us in 2024, a way to internalize this is to say that a weekday meal should not be an overly important part of one's day. A weekday meal should not be an overly important part of one's day. And Rabbi Miller advises that we should limit exposures at non-meal times to food and food advertisements. Meaning that if we're just like wandering around or flipping through the newspaper, we shouldn't spend time looking at advertisements of food or looking around at food that's available. That'll be a way to curtail ourselves in some way. So, the next topic is the benefits of Precious. The Sefer Chinuch on the mitzvah of Lo Sasur Achrei Levavchem V'Achrei Nechem says that if a person curtails his taivas, if he doesn't go all out with his desires, he curtails them, then he'll be able to be samech b'chalko. He'll be able to be happy with what he already has. My Rabbi Menachem Spurka from Muncie, he gave some practical advice. He said that a person is like a container. A person needs to be filled with something. So, if a person is fully filled with Torah, there'll be no room for excessive indulgence in physicality. But if a person is not so filled with Torah, then there'll be more room to the space we need to be filled by physicality. So until the point that a person is fully filled by Torah, he is going to have some degree of physicality. So Rabbi Sperger encouraged a person should not try to pull himself away from gashmias, from food and drink, but rather a person should just fill himself with the Torah. And over time, the more and more a person fills himself with the Torah, the less room there'll be for physicality. Therefore, Precious is not something to be actively worked on. On the contrast, Rabbi Katzin said from Lev Chatzman that if a person used to value something in the past which he really no longer feels to be valuable, he needs to rewrite that in his brain as being not valuable. But as far as physicality, he shouldn't push away the physicality, rather he should just bring in more Torah into himself. Rashi in Parshas Ekev, Parak Yud Aleph Pasuk Tes Zayin, says that once Klal Yisrael separated from the Torah, then we serve the Avodah Zarah. And this is like Rabbi Stroker was saying. If we have the Torah, then there's no room for this other stuff like Gashmias and Avodah Zarah. But if we separate it from the Torah, then our containers need to be filled with Avodah Zarah or physicality, and we'll end up doing those activities. So now we've finished discussing the major topic of Precious, of separating from the world to an appropriate degree. Thank you, Mrs. Vistal. I mean, Rabbi Miller has told me many times that there's really only a small amount of Yiddishkeit that's black and white, that's absolute prohibited and permitted. Most of it is a gray area, which just depends on the person's age, lifestyle, where they live, upbringing, who's in their life, what they do. So, and how much involvement one should have with this world is a major example of that. As long as the person's eating kosher food, and he's not transgressing basa v'chala, eating milk, he's making brachas, then it's all the range, and it's a broad spectrum. And hopefully a person should have some guidance from a rabbi about how to engage in these areas that the Torah does not give specific guidelines, yes or no on.
Also, doesn't it say Ein Kemach, Ein Torah?
It also says in Torah and Kemach. So both are needed. Torah and Kemach. Learning and working. Okay, so next topic, the second half of the coin is providing the body what it needs. The Mesilas Yesharim says that precious, when appropriate, is very good. All that we've spoken about so far. If it's applied in an appropriate measure, this is a very good thing. However, precious hara, which is not giving the body basic needs, is unhelpful and not Ratzon Hashem, and not the will of Hashem. Rabbi Braun had me read the sefer from Rabbi Dan Tompkin, called Rediscovering the Lost Self, which we've spoken about in the past in the Sefer of Torah. And the way I viewed it is that this sefer, Rediscovering, is basically a fleshing out of the Mesilas Yesharim's topic of precious hara, of avoiding all of the bad ways of not giving oneself what one needs. And Rabbi Braun, by Rashim Fabatzi, he basically agreed to me with this characterization. Rabbi Tompkin addresses areas of need including physical, social, emotional, and relaxation. Rabbi Tompkin's basic thesis is that the body, when given what it needs, will partner with the neshama for the long term. That if we give the body what it needs in those above areas, then it'll be a partner with the neshama, with the soul, for the long term, for a person to sustain avodas Hashem, sustain service of Hashem. Rabbi Katzin says that on Shabbos, we eat fish and we eat meat to allow the body to enjoy the sanctity of Shabbos, Kedusha Shabbos, in its own way. And when a person does that, this will then allow the neshama to absorb the spiritual sanctity of Shabbos. So Rabbi Katzin says the same is true during the week. During the week, we give the body enough so that it won't be an impediment for the soul. Then, once we give the body what it needs, the neshama, the soul, will be able to enjoy learning Torah and fulfilling mitzvahs all week. Now that the body is not withholding or preventing the soul, the neshama will be able to enjoy learning Torah and doing mitzvahs all week. Well, according to my, thank you for your comments, Mr. Vistal. According to my Rabbi Fishel Bechler, he quoted from his Rabbi of Mordechai Gifter, saying the Mishnah we quoted earlier is basically saying that, like, if it so needs to be, a person should be willing to eat bread with salt in order to stay in learning. But Ein Hanami, it's true. Rabbi Tompkin holds that if a person is not able to provide his body what it needs in America in 2024, that he should leave learning and go to work. That's definitely, he agrees with that thesis. Okay, the next part is titled Bread with Jam. Chavusha, Hershel Yafi, he quoted from the Sefer from Rabbi Tompkin, this mashal of a bread with jam. So when a parent packs lunch for their child, the parent may want the child to eat the bread. But in order for the child to eat the bread, the child is not just going to eat the bread straight. The parent needs to put on some jam on top of the bread. So the child will eat the bread with the jam, and then they'll get the nutrients of the bread, and they'll also have the jam. So we're talking saying that we give the body some jam so that the neshama can enjoy the bread of the Torah and mitzvahs. The Torah and mitzvahs are the bread, the physical delights are the jam, so we give the body the jam so that the neshama can enjoy the Torah and mitzvahs. The Sefer HaChaim written by the Maral of Prague's brother, says a drush on the Gemara in Brachos, Daf Mem Amud Aleph. The halacha which you may be familiar with is that if a person has an animal, first he needs to feed the animal, then he can feed himself. The Sefer Chaim says a drush that first a person needs to feed his animalistic self, and then he can feed his neshama, he can feed his soul, Torah and mitzvahs. But first comes with feeding his animalistic self with the physicality that he needs. We said at the beginning we'd come to address the word about Yitzchak Avinu by Berachos Esav. So, again, just to say over the question is, when Yitzchak Avinu was giving the brachos to Esav, how come Yitzchak Avinu insisted on having a good meal? What's the significance of the good meal? So, one answer which I heard, I'll say this like my answer, in contrast with the other answers, is that Yitzchak wanted that he should be able to give the bracha to Esav wholeheartedly, with both his body and soul coming as one to give the bracha. So therefore, in order that his body would be willing to participate in helping give the bracha, so therefore Yitzchak made sure to give his body a nice meal. The Malbim's Mahalach is that the neshama is the one giving the bracha, but the body has to be placated since the body won't interfere with the neshama's giving a bracha, like Rabbi Katzin said earlier. Rabbi Gerko told me, Rav Stoughton, that a strong body leads to a strong neshama. If the body is strong, then the neshama will be strong. So, with regards to Yitzchak Avinu, this word is spoken out by the Rein Machai. So Rein Machai says, when one strengthens the energies of the body, then that will bring to new light the strengths of the soul. So by the body being strong, that will propel and give new energy, or latent energy will be brought to life of the neshama. So by Yitzchak giving his body what he needs, that will bring out new energies in the soul to give the bracha. Now, Rivka did not require that wine was added to the menu, but Yaakov served wine to Yitzchak. The Radak says the reason is because wine gladdens the heart, and Yaakov wanted to make sure that Yitzchak would give the brachas with a full heart. Rabbi Tomkin quotes from Rus Rabbah Hay that Boaz used to drink something sweet after eating and before learning. The purpose of this was to draw his tongue to the Torah study. That's why Boaz would drink something sweet after eating and before learning, to draw his tongue to Torah study. Rabbi Tomkin told me that if a person's heart, meaning like his body and all the ways Rabbi Tomkin has spoken about, physically, socially, emotionally, if his heart is settled, then the work of Hashem can affect one's inner being. And this is really another way of saying the Rein Machai, because when a person strengthens the body, this will bring to light the energies of the soul. If the heart is settled, then the work of Hashem will affect the inner being. The next section is titled Avodas Hashem Mitoch Hakar Shatov, serving Hashem with gratitude. So now I'd like to advance a position that this is definitely a different view than before about having like little involvement with the world. This is a position that it could be that enjoying this world could directly enhance our Avodas Hashem. The Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva, he says that the purpose of the brachos in Parshat B'Chukosai is to enable us to fulfill the Torah. The Rambam says that the reason why we have the blessings at the beginning of Parshat B'Chukosai is to help enable us to fulfill the Torah. For example, if we have food, then we'll have the energy to be able to study Torah. Rashi's example is that 3-year ripened fruits will be very tasty. So the question is, if we put Rambam and Rashi together, how will having tasty fruits enable us to serve Hashem? What connection is there between eating tasty fruits and serving Hashem? So I believe one answer is that we will recognize Hashem as the source of the tasty fruit. We'll connect the fruit to Hashem. And 2, we'll be in such a good mood from the tasty fruit that we'll want to serve Hashem. This is why I believe it's a bracha to have very tasty fruit. I asked the Bitachon Hotline in Sevig Alambeck whether it is appropriate to enjoy a weekday meal. And he answered, it is appropriate if it will bring a person to a Karsha Tov, to gratitude of Hashem. Rabbi Naftali Beer, Rosh Hashanah of Boston, he said that if a person eats with a Karsha Tov, with gratitude for the tasty and nutritious foods, then he'll feel like Hashem is truly taking care of us, and it'll come to want to serve Hashem. So, therefore, Rabbi Meir says a person should try, even during the week, to eat tasty and nutritious foods so that he'll come to feeling like Hashem is taking care of him and will want to serve Hashem. Avram Avinu in Parshas Vayera, he viewed food as an envoy, as a mechanism for which people could come to recognize Hashem. Rabbi Beer says that food was part of the plan for Avram's guests to recognize Hashem, along with his showing interest in them during the meal. Avram Avinu specifically planned that when they would eat good food, then they would say, who ate this? Who created this food? Who served this food? And Avram Avinu would say, Hashem created this food. So Avram Avinu felt that the food process was a way that people could end up recognizing Hashem. So hopefully this is a lesson for us that eating good food can bring us to want to be able to recognize Hashem. The Sefer HaChinuch, when talking about Birkas Hamazon, he says that first we eat the food, and then the Torah requires that we say the blessing, thank Hashem for the food. Whereas other brachos, which is like Birkas HaTorah, which is also from the Torah, is before the action. First we say the bracha, and then we learn Torah. So how come the order is split for Birkas Hamazon? So Sefer Chinuch answered that we first need to actually enjoy the food before we can thank Hashem for it. That's why first we eat the food, and then we say the grace after meals. This summer, I was handling a shaila about cheesecake with Rabbi Gams, Rabbi Yeshua Gams, the posek in my yeshiva. And Rabbi Gams, when we were done handling the shaila, when we were done discussing the shaila, he told me the following. He told me, enjoy the cheesecake and enjoy the bracha. Now, I believe Rabbi Gans was mechaber to the Sefer HaChinuch, because the Sefer HaChinuch taught us first we eat the food, then we thank Hashem. Rabbi Gans was telling me the same thing. If I can truly enjoy the cheesecake, then I'll be able to make a bracha achmona, the blessing after the cheesecake, with a full heart and a karza tov. So these are approaches definitely different than the approach of Rav Yashav and the Chazon Ish, and who were not involved with this world, who were not involved with their food. But there's many approaches to authentic avodas Hashem, and it, like you said earlier, it depends on the person, stage of life, upbringing, and many factors. The next section is titled "Striking the Balance." I'd like to welcome my chaver Elchanan Gurko, calling in from Sodom. Rabbi Beer quotes from the Maral on the Mishnah of quoted earlier, Pasim al Tochal, bread with salt shall you eat, the Maharal understands that this is teaching us the following two things. One, a person should provide himself what is normal in society. If he's living in America in 2024, and this is the way most people act in physicality, this is how he should act as well. And two, a person should provide himself with what he personally needs. Even if in society they don't do that, but if he himself needs it, he should provide himself what he needs. To illustrate, even though the Mishnah may say, Alaris Tishon, sleep on the floor, but if in America in 2024 it's common for people to sleep on a mattress, then the Maharal is telling us a person should sleep on a mattress. And two, if a person himself needs 2,000 calories, he should take in those calories. But Rabbi said from the Maharal that excesses of what's more than necessary what's more than normal, more than necessary should be avoided. My yeshiva, the yeshiva Gedol, the 5 towns, always served Leisman de Polik. Everyone agreed the food was very good. And when I learned Zor Sameach, the yeshiva served fleshik every night for supper, usually chicken. Rabbi Kathy explained the reason for this approach is because he said there should be no reason why a person should not learn Torah. Meaning that if a person doesn't like the food and therefore he leaves the yeshiva, that's worse off than staying and learning and eating good food. It's better he should keep learning and eat good food. This really means that Torah study is preeminent, is more important than minimizing physicality. Rabbi Katz quoted from Rabbi Aaron Tversky, a rabbi in the dean of Hofstra Law School. Rabbi Tversky said, and Rabbi Katz said, both parts are very important. That person should not take any more nor any less from this world than is necessary. Not more or not less from this world than is necessary for him in the given situation. It's important that a person not delude himself. It's important that a person not delude himself. Rabbi Braun, my yeshiva from Muncie, he once quoted, it's not a quote, he kind of like made up this story, but it's a fake story of a chassid who eats 10 pieces of kugel on Shabbos. And he explains what's the reason of eating 10 pieces of kugel on Shabbos. It's one for each of the 10 spheres, the 10 Kabbalistic spheres. Rabbi Braun says, of course he's deluding himself. He's eating 10 pieces because he's a glutton. But he's claiming that he's eating 10 pieces for the 10 spheres. So it's important that a person not delude himself about his involvement in physicality or his kavanos, his intentions. The Gemara in Ksubis, Daf Kuf Daled with Aleph, brings an end-of-life recollection from Rebbe Yehuda Nasi, author of the Mishnayos. The Gemara relates that Rebbe raised also his 10 fingers in the air and said, I toiled with my 10 fingers in the Torah and did not benefit even with my little finger. Now we'll fulfill a sip of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Kol Shakol Nimudvaro. All right, thank you, Dan. So there are a few ways to understand Rebbe. The way I understand Rabbi Chaim Mintz, Mashgiach of Staten Island, the way he understands Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, is that Rebbe did not gain any enjoyment from this world at all, but rather Rebbe partook of what he needed from this world in order to subsist and cultivate his Torah study. Bachamusa, Dr. Mark Bronstein from the 5 Towns, he showed me that the Torah understands like this. That Rebbe, it's not that he didn't get any benefit from this world, but so whatever benefit he got, he channeled it and funneled it for his Torah study. But others he acted like Rabbi Yashiv, Rabbi Katzin, Shita Mikubetz, or like this, that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi personally gained no benefit from this world at all. So even within Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, there's room to interpretation what exactly his involvement was, whether it's more like a Rav Yashiv, that he had no involvement, or it's more like what we said in the last segment, that he had involvement, but he only took what was necessary, and he used what he did, he took what he did and used it for his Torah study. Well, even if a person has wealth, but it doesn't necessarily mean they had to eat the most extravagant meals, or even if they did, like Shlomo HaMelech did, but it could be they truly only did for the purpose of the rabbinate or some sort of external means, but they really didn't internalize this matter. Like, for example, the Regina Rebbe believed that the Rebbe needed to exude some degree of kavod, some degree of external honor. So therefore he wore fancy boots. However, he personally did not put any soles in the boots. So therefore he would not personally get any benefit from these fancy boots. Thank you for your comments, Ms. Fistel. As far as the Rambam diet, my Masorah from one of my Rebbeim, from the 5 towns of Yisachar Lovi, is that most of the Mefarshim did not comment on the Rambam section of diet because this section was not really accepted in the Masorah. Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky did hold, he himself practiced like the Rambam diet, but my Masorah from one of my Rebbeim is that the Rambam diet was generally not accepted in the mainstream. One of my Rebbeim from Muncie, Rabbi Chaim Dunner, Rabbi Baruch Chaim Dunner, son of Diane Aaron Dunner, from England, once said that no taiva is not permitted in some form, meaning every physical desire, whether food, drink, relationships, or otherwise, is all permitted in some time, some place, in some form. There's no desire that Hashem created that completely shut a Jewish person off from. I'm certainly not as well versed in Sefer Tanya as my Chaver Chanan is, but one quote I do know, thanks to Benny Friedman, is as follows from Sefer Tanya: Ki yesod v'shoresh kol haTorah kulahu la'agbiu lahalis nefesh al guf. That the principle and foundation of the whole Torah is to uplift the soul from on the body. Meaning that the body, at the end of the day, should not be the primary. The body should support the endeavors of the neshama, but the body itself should not be primary. The Mesilas Yesharim in Kedusha says that when a tzaddik engages in precious, when a tzaddik separates himself from the world, it needs to be done slowly. And that's for someone who's at the very end of the Mesilas Yesharim, who's holding on one of the almost an unimaginably high level, like the level of maybe the Tanaim or Aaron Cohen or Moshe Rabbeinu. Such a person, if he's separating himself from this world, has to do it slowly. So all the more so for a person who's not yet a super tzaddik, has to be very careful about separating himself from this world too quickly. Rabbi Katzin said that a person can dash in both bahachim. He can be involved in both areas. One, he can practice like a Rav Yashiv and not get too involved in this world. And two, he can, whatever involvement he does have, he can use it towards the service of Hashem. To have a karas tov, to be grateful to Hashem, to feel like Hashem is taking care of him, and come to serve Hashem. And like we talked about earlier with Mrs. Fistel, this really a person needs Moshe Tzedek. He needs scales, he needs even scales to be able to weigh this out, how much he should be involved, how much he should pull away, and what his kavanas, what his intent should be. The Ramah says, this is a general principle. Whether one does more or less, that's not the main thing. The main thing is that he aligns his heart to Hashem. As long as he tries his best to do what's right by Hashem, that really is the main thing. So speaking of which, I'd like to cover some halachas of some foods which we have eaten over the past several days, and contrast them with some very similar foods. So in our family, we made some pumpkin pie last week, and we enjoyed it over the past several days. So I was speaking with the posek of my yeshiva, Rabbi Yeshua Gams, about what is the proper bracha to make on pumpkin pie. We're assuming that the pumpkin pie is made in some sort of a pie crust. Rabbi Gams told me that pumpkin pie, the way it's usually made based on his experience of kitchen, is that the crust is not just there to hold together the pumpkin material, but rather it's in place to add some taste to the pumpkin pie. This being the case, even if there's only a small amount of crust and there's much more amount of pumpkin, still when we make a bracha rishona, if we're not eating during the meal, if we're eating like as a snack, then we make a mizonos on the pumpkin pie. Because mizonos is chashuv, mizonos has a higher status, that even though the pumpkin material may be rove, may be majority, but as long as the mizonos is trying to give some taste to the overall food, then we make a bracha of mizonos. And as far as after the eating, we make, if we eat a kazayas of the mizonos, then we will make a al hamichya. In my experience, the pumpkin pie we made and the pie crust we bought at Shaw's, I had a pretty sizable piece of the pumpkin pie, but I don't think that there was enough for mizonos. Maybe if there would be a thicker crust for the mizonos, it would be a kazayas, but if a person is a very thin crust, I would not suggest making an al hamichya. But if you did eat a kazayas of the pumpkin filling, if you eat a good amount of the pumpkin filling, then he would make a berei nefashos on the pumpkin filling. But if he ate a kazayas of mizonos, he would only make an al hamichya and not a berei nefashos. Now, if pumpkin pie is eaten during the meal, since, like we said, the main bracha is mizonos, in our minhag is we don't make mizonos bracha during the meal, then we would not make a bracha of mizonos during a bread meal on pumpkin pie. But if a person would make a pumpkin pie without a crust, then he would make shahakal on the pumpkin pie. The way I understood from Rabbi Gams that we make a shahakal on the filling of, we would make a shahakal on the filling of pumpkin pie because it's changed its form from the original state. Okay, thank you. So, but mizonos definitely has a higher status of bracha than both hadama or shahakal. Now, the other similar food which we eat on Shavuos is cheesecake. Rabbi Gam says that the halachic principles are the same, but the metzias, the reality is a little different. Because Rabbi Gam said, if you would have a cheesecake with crust, where the crust is meant to give taste to the cheesecake, then we would make a mizonos eating the cheesecake not during the meal. If we're eating the cheesecake like as a snack, like a kiddush, and there's a crust that gives taste, then we'd make a mizonos. And if we ate a kazayas of the mizonos, we'd make an al hamichya afterwards. But Rabbi Gam said that there's some cheesecakes that the metzias is, the reality is, the only reason the crust is there is to hold together the cheesecake, not to give taste. Rabbi Gam said if that's true, then we would make a shahakal on the cheesecake and the berei nefashos if we ate a kazayas of the cheesecake within kedei that's passed within about 4 minutes. So again, with the yesod with both pumpkin pie and cheesecake is if we're eating the crust for the taste, we make mizonos. If we're not eating the crust for the taste, or if there's no crust, then we make the bracha of the filling. And now today we talked about, while we're eating kosher food, our approach to the food to eat in a refined manner. So,
I just want to say, Mom, when Yoni uses the word kazayas, it means an olive's worth. A kazayas amount.
So I'll say Ashreini Machal Chalkeni, that we care about and that Hashem cares about, not just what we do, what comes out of the mouth, but also what comes into the mouth, not just what comes in, but the way we eat it, and our approach and our kavanas, and what we have in mind. So hopefully Hashem will be zocher to nash a little bit from the madrigas of the Chazon Ish, from Rav Yashiv and the Chassam Sofer, and that food will not be the center point and the highlight of our day. If we think about all the great things we did, hopefully what we had for lunch is not going to be up there with amongst all the Torah we learned, the mitzvahs that we did, working, exercise, all the other worthwhile things we did. Hopefully lunch is not gonna be up there. And hopefully B'ezras Hashem will be able to take the advice of our beer, that when we eat, we'll be able to feel like Hashem is taking care of us, and we eat good food, nutritious food, and then we'll want to think, how can we repay Hashem, and we'll come to a stronger service of Hashem.